Welcome back to another episode of the Liberated Woman podcast. I'm really excited that you're joining me again today because today I have a very special guest. Her name is Evlyn, and she is a mother, a wife, a doula, and an earth lover. And she believes wholeheartedly in the birth and the transition from maiden to mother as a rite of passage, which is something that is really, really important for us to be talking about on this podcast. She loves to weave rituals, rhythm, and ceremony into her work to support and hold birthing people, women, and families in the most sacred of spaces through birth work, mother's blessings, and postpartum care. And I absolutely love this because this is a really, really important topic. It's something that I talk about a lot with the view of becoming a mother. Also, as someone who trained to be a doula, I know this work to be really sacred and really holy for women who are going through this rite of passage. So I'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit, Evlyn, and tell us how you got into this work.
Yeah, so hi. I'm Evlyn, and you've sort of encompassed it all there really. But like many doulas, I suppose, my own birth and mothering journey brought me into this birth world and work, and without going into sort of too much nitty-gritty, but my birth experience was unexpected. It was not what I desired or planned. And I came away feeling hurt physically, mentally, not listened to. And I'd never really experienced sort of a traumatic event, I suppose. I'd been through stuff, of course, like everybody has, but there was nothing. This felt huge, and it was a catalyst for change for me. And the way that I personally deal with things is to understand and to learn. And from there, I worked a little bit to understand what happened and came across the concept of doulaing, and it just sang to me, it spoke to me, and I thought, like fuck, is it happening to me again? And like fuck, do I want it to happen to any other women? And I need to be part of this movement and part of this change. So yeah, that's where I am at, and loving it. I love being in this space. It feels amazing and an honor to be there. Yeah.
And for those listeners who maybe have never heard of a doula or
Mm-hmm.
never even heard of the phrase doula, maybe you could just explain in your words what a doula is or what a doula does for women who are going through pregnancy, who are going to give birth, and just explain, a little bit about what their role is. And maybe we'll have like a similar description of what a doula is from the training that you've done and the work
Yeah.
that you've done and my training in it as well. Yeah, I'd love to hear what your version of what
Yeah. So I sort of in a nutshell, a doula is someone that walks with women and birthing people and their families through antenatally, so through their pregnancy, through birth, through labor, and through the postpartum period and into their parenting experience, and helps advocate for them and educate them, and to just try and help them achieve the experiences in their birth and their parenting that they desire and that they deserve. And through that, I also hold mother's blessings, which is where we sit in circle as a group of women with the new mum, and we share stories. It's all about her. It's like your equivalent of a baby shower, but about the mum rather than about the baby. And that's what I love doing, really, and sort of supporting her through that rite of passage from maiden to mother, and holding her in that space and sharing stories and gifts and food and just all that lovely stuff.
Yeah, something that I remember learning on my doula training was this idea of like who mothers the mother, and
Mm-hmm.
this idea that usually when we looked at kind of different cultures around the world, like how different cultures approach birth and how different
Yeah.
cultures approach and religions and nationalities approach the whole birthing concept. And in the UK, it seems to me, you're shaking your head because it seems to me,
Yeah.
I know some of you are going to watch this on YouTube, some of you are going to be listening on the podcast, but Evlyn is shaking her head as like a big no, because I think she knows what I'm about to say. But in the culture in the UK, like what I've witnessed in the past is people want to come and visit the baby with very little regard for how the mother might be feeling, or the protective energy of the mother in the bubble, and maybe the mother doesn't want visitors to come around, and often people then expect them to make a cup of tea and provide some sort of biscuits or something, nourishment, rather than, like, they want to come and visit the baby and hold the baby, but who's there to really hold the mother through a very, very
Exactly.
difficult transition. So looking at other cultures where, you know, actually the mother is very protected for the first few weeks postpartum, and actually it's all about looking after her. And I remember when I lived in Israel, and friends were giving birth, having babies, they would organize like a meal train, so that people would be
Yeah.
you know, different people would be responsible for bringing around food for the parents. So that's like one less thing that they had to worry
And
about.
that's so easy. That's not a hard thing to
Yeah.
do. It's just we've just forgotten sort of the old ways, really. And I always say that is, everyone wants to hold the baby, but who wants to hold the mother? We're like these vessels that just babies pass through, and then what happens then? We're empty, like we're just pushed aside, and it's it can be really hard. And I think part of my postpartum period as well was that realization of, you're sort of like worshipped and held at such high regard when you're pregnant. Everyone, how are you? Can I do anything for you, etc. And then baby's here, and it's, oh, I'll hold the baby while you hoover up, having just, 5 days post surgery or whatever it is. Like, yeah, it's tough, but that's sort of what has brought me to want to be part of the shift, really.
And you mentioned earlier that you had a traumatic experience with your birth, and something that you mentioned, which I feel very passionately about, as you know, from coming to my circles and being in my events, in my world, is that I really truly believe that women need to be heard. And you mentioned that you felt unheard in that space. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about why you felt that, or anything that happened to you where you felt unheard, that then allowed you to want to be an advocate for women to be heard in this space?
Sure. So just a little bit of background. As I was planning for this beautiful water birth at home in my living room with my soundtrack, my hypnobirthing, my husband, and a really private, sacred space. And through at the time, obviously I did what I knew was right and felt right for me at the time with the information I was given. But looking back, I wasn't giving the information that actually would have been able to then make an informed decision. So I ended up having an induction which lasted 2 days, and then baby wasn't coming naturally, and I ended up with an emergency cesarean. And after that, I was learning to be a mum. I was recovering emotionally, physically, also dealing with this huge transition and shift in identity, learning to breastfeed. I'd never held a baby before, really, before having my own baby. But everyone said, but you're safe, baby's safe. That's all that matters. And I thought, well, no, that's not all that matters. I'm safe physically, I'm here, I'm alive, but what a low bar. How can that bar be so low that, okay, we're both alive and that's all that matters? I just kept being told, you're okay, and that's the only thing that mattered in that space. And it lit a fire in me, in my heart and in my womb, and I thought, like, no, that's not right, that's not okay. And even when you go to the doctors at 6 weeks postpartum, which is like this magical time that they give you, that you're supposed to be all okay and see you later, and all that he wanted to say was, yeah, baby's fine, and what are you doing for contraception? And I'm like, I'm fine, thank you. Like, thanks for asking. Yeah, exactly. And it was just a huge catalyst for me to say, this is not how it's supposed to be. I think lots of different events happen like that, where you feel like you're not heard, and that's how I deal with it, is to work out what's happened and what can I do to change.
Yeah. And do you think that, in the birthing world, that, what I understood as well from the training and from talking to women who are mothers, that you know, we don't necessarily get the information that we need to go and seek that information. And of course there's so much information out there, but not necessarily the correct information, and a lot of women might not have that informed consent, and under pressure, like, you know, you said, oh, the baby wasn't coming naturally, and you were induced, and then when you're in that space in a hospital, you're very vulnerable as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And if a doctor comes up to you, and a man in a white coat or a woman in a white coat with the perceived authority figure says to you, well, you know, your baby's in danger and you need to do X, Y, and Z, you're in a vulnerable enough state to just go along with it, unless you know how to advocate for yourself. And I think this is a story that I've heard over and over again from so many women that wanted to have the kind of birth that you desired, had planned for that kind of birth. And we know that Mother Nature doesn't always take us on the course that we want. And in a way, as difficult as it was for you, it was the catalyst for your next like evolution, right? It was the catalyst for what you do now. So there's always a lesson in there somewhere, even though it feels so difficult at the time and it's not what we actually desire. And so what kind of advice would you give to women who are looking to become mothers, who are pregnant currently, or maybe have never heard of a doula, or know what kind of offerings? And I know doulas offer different sorts of things. Some doulas are specifically postpartum, some are specifically just for the birth, some are kind of do the whole range, some do all, you know, all sorts of different things. So yeah, maybe just share with the listeners a little bit about any advice that you could offer to a woman who is pregnant or looking to become a mother, but what sorts of information they might not know about, that they could know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think something I hear a lot, which I find difficult to hear, is when you say, have you thought about your birth, or a birth plan, or a birth preference, or whatever you want to call it? And I get a lot of, well, I'm just going to go with the flow. And I just think, okay, but whose flow are you going with? Because we're groomed, especially as women, from when we're teeny tiny, to just sit down, shut up, and follow the rules. And actually that's not always what's best for you. And you know, I'm absolutely not anti healthcare or any of those things, and that has a place, of course it has a place, and they are wonderful and we need them. But what we actually really need is to trust ourselves, and as women, trust our power and trust our physiology. Everything has been so pathologized, and I think you, as a pregnant person, you go out and you spend hundreds of pounds on the pram or the new crib or all these different things, when let's just take a step back and invest in yourself. And you spend all this money on physical items, why don't you invest that money on, like you say, a doula, or a private antenatal course, an independent course that's away from the hospital, away from the medical system to a certain extent, and just invest in, you know, you wouldn't walk into building a house or a wedding day or even cooking a dinner without putting your ducks in a row and working out exactly what you need. And I think just understanding what's actually happening to your body and the power you hold inside, and just working through that and how to bring that through. And that is a doula. And I know not everybody has the access to a doula or to that information, but so many doulas out there offer payment plans or things on their website that you might be able to download for free. And there's so many great Instagrams or information online that will actually support what it is that is right for you. And for some people that is going into the hospital and having a planned cesarean or having an induction, whatever it is. But just to know that you can trust yourself and listen to your soul and your intuition, and that is going to be right. And no matter how that pans out, that is how it's supposed to be for you, if you can just advocate for yourself. That's such a long answer.
No, absolutely. I mean, there is lots of really good information out there. I follow quite a few doula Instagrams, and I think there are lots of people out there who are, you know, extremely experienced and professional in what they do. I know in Norfolk, where we live, there's a whole, you know, they call it a cuddle of doulas, but there's a whole collection of doulas who you know, support each other and are advocating for each other and helping each other out, and staying informed of what's going on in the systems as well, so that you can fight that, and find alternative ways
And
independently.
just ask questions.
Yeah.
Like, if you're told you have to do this, you need to do that, you don't have to do anything unless it feels right for you. So just question,
Yeah,
ask for statistics.
absolutely. That is something I'm always encouraging women to do as part of their liberation. It's like, ask the questions, like stay sovereign, like use your critical thinking. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, and don't be afraid to have your voice be heard, because it's the same with anything. You know, when I did an episode on how to choose your healer, like if you can't ask them questions, how do you know you can trust them
Yeah.
to work with them? And, you know, if you've got the opportunity and the access to work with a doula, that's what they're there for. They're there to answer your questions. They're there to hold you through a process that is potentially an unknown process to you. And like you said, you know, I wouldn't start building a house by myself. I need to get advice from somebody else who knows what they're doing. You know, we're not talking here about outsourcing your power to other people who have more expertise than you in this way, but actually someone who's going to be on your side and advocate for you and support you through, like you said, a rite of passage that has been very, very lost, from the ancient ways, and it just becomes this new title that you are a mother, and all of a sudden, like you said, you've got to learn all these new things in your life, and there are books out there, and there are podcasts, and there are this, but no one can truly prepare you for something like that.
No.
I think it very much is a personal journey. And, you know, women that are doing this by themselves as well, that maybe they don't have a partner and they don't have a support, and that kind of
Super women, that's what we call
super
them.
women, yeah. That leads me kind of nicely onto the title of this podcast, which was "It Takes a Village: Why Mothers Are Struggling in the Modern World." And one thing, you know, I'm not a mother yet, but I'm very much on the path to becoming one in the near future. That, you know, I'm at an age where I'm thinking about it a lot. And one of the things that keeps coming to me is that there's something that just doesn't sit right in my womb to have a child, just me, my partner in the house with the cat and no one else around me. It feels really, really wrong to me to bring a child into the world that way. For me personally, you know, everyone's different and there's no right or wrong, but what I keep feeling in my womb space is that I really need a strong sisterhood around me, and that my partner would need strong brotherhood around him, because who's going to prepare him to become a father? You know, like all he'll have is his own father, or the model of, you know, his friends becoming fathers, and maybe they're very different to him. And I really truly feel that I would want that community around me and not be isolated in my house. And many women that come into my field that are mothers, whether they have a partner or whether they're a single mom, the common theme that I see is struggle, loneliness, not being heard, not feeling taken care of, and just this constant frustration of, you know, I know even you've said it to me before, like, oh, my husband's working on this night, so I can't do that. And like, just like, here's my, you know, even when we were trying to organize this podcast, just
Yeah.
well, who's going to look after my child? Like, I don't have childcare,
Yeah.
right? And so it was this, and it's this that it really upsets me. Often when I have like single mums wanting to come to my events and their childcare lets them down and they can't come, and it's like, well, that was their time for them, that they wanted to do something for themselves, and then they were let down and they didn't get to do it, and they have no one else to turn to. How did we get there? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess you'd say, is it the industrialization? I don't know, but how we've got such a focus on this nuclear family, haven't we? Where it's mum, dad, children, and we expect so much from that unit. We expect them to be the cooks, the cleaners, the childcare, the agony aunt, the birth partner, everything. And that is too much to expect from that group of people. You know, that the women, the sisters, the mothers, they're not seeing birth and seeing motherhood. They're not being modeled to. Years ago, we'd see the wise women of the village who wouldn't necessarily offer advice, which is great because there's so much unsolicited advice out there, but they'd offer the listening ear, and they'd hold the space for you, and we'd see that move through. You know, it's ingrained in us to live in community. And I know that there are people that live in communes out there, but that's not really, like you said earlier, the society that we live in here in the Western world. That's not the norm. But we're supposed to birth, to live, to mother, to die in community. This cyclical nature is supposed to be witnessed, and that it's just not there. And I think some of that is down to the medicalization of birth. You know, in the 50s, 60s, birth moved predominantly from home to hospital, and as part of that, the information and the lived experience was taken away from the women. The power was taken away from the women and put in the hands of, like we said, the doctors and all of that. And the husband is normally the birth partner, which is great. My husband is great. He was my birth partner, but he has not birthed. There is no way that he has never mothered. There's no way he can hold that in the same way as a group of women. And in that process, I think we're infantilizing women. We're not providing them with, we're not empowering them. We're doing them, it's a dishonor. And by pathologizing the whole process, from birth to sleep schedules, to feeding schedules, to all of this, it's just taking away that, like we said, about listening to your intuition, because you think, well, my baby doesn't sleep for 4 hours at a time, or have a 2-hour nap in the day, or feed every 3 hours, or I'm going to try all these other things. And it's just, we're not fulfilling our limitless potential by doing that. And that's at the detriment of not only us as mums and also our partners and our families, but at our children and at their children and their children. It's just an ongoing dishonor and a disservice to us as families. And we need that community. Without that critical support network, what do we do? Where do we turn?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I feel a lot, particularly at the age, I'm 37 now. I just turned 37 this year, and I've lived in loads of different countries and different cultures and different spaces. And I've kind of kept missing the boat of when my friends were having babies. So, like when I was younger and living in London, I had friends that were getting married and having babies then. And I flew off to Singapore to explore my career and travel and do the wild thing at 25. And then when I moved to Israel, I was in my 30s, early 30s, and then all my friends there were starting to get married and have babies, and I kind of missed the boat there too. And now that I'm back in the UK for now, the majority of women I know or have met here where I live, they've either had their babies and they're grown up, so they're teenagers or they're grown up adults, so they're kind of at the other end of motherhood, or they're single mums, so they have a different kind of that with grown-up children. Or I have friends that just didn't have children, or I've got friends that are at least 10 years younger than me and are nowhere near having children. So I very much feel like in an echo chamber of like, there's literally no one in my friendship group, my vortex in this where I live, that's going through the same thing as me, who's like in a relationship, potentially going to have children. And it really hits me that that's something that I don't have around me, and that that's not something I'm not willing to bring a child into the world when I don't have that support network. And I know that we have family members, and there are women out there. And of course, I guess you meet more women when you become a mother. You go to particular groups and you find your particular niche group of friends, whether
I think even that, you say that, but I've done the baby groups, I've done the WhatsApp groups, and I just find that I'm speaking from my experience, and I know some people find forever friends in those groups, but for me, I just found it wasn't a place of love and strength and uplifting, which is what I needed in that time. It was comparison and unsolicited advice, and my baby sleeps through the night, my baby doesn't, have you tried this? And it just makes you feel shit. And without without the right people, and I've tried that, you know, you can call in a tribe, you can put feelers out there, but it's hard. You're trying to be a mom, you're trying to do this shift. You shouldn't have to just be the one all the time to pull that in and summon the village. It's just not, you don't have the energy all the time,
and I
and
think
it's hard.
I think what's missing, as you said before, was like mothers don't witness mothering. So it's, you know, when you're living in community and you have, you know, particularly in certain cultures around the world, it's still very present. But like when you see, you know, you've witnessed the grandmothers, and you've got the wise women, and then they're there to support the mother, and there's other mothers, and you witness like other people going through that in a very different way. You know, we've never, I mean, let's be honest, and listeners, you can think about this too. Like, have you ever, beyond watching it on television or in a film, which is super inaccurate for how most births actually go, have you ever witnessed another woman giving birth? The answer is probably no, because it's not something that you are privy to go and watch, because it's not seen as a ritual or a rite of passage. And actually, if we lived in a space where that was the norm and young girls were seeing that, young girls, you know, I went to watch the Barbie movie yesterday, which I have a whole load of things to say about, which
I've not seen it yet. I've heard mixed things.
But like, it started off with little girls playing with dolls, and like before the Barbie doll, just like dolls, and like it kind of goes, whoa, from like a young age, as women, we are conditioned to play mother, like play the mother with baby dolls, but we don't actually get to witness what it's like to become the mother, right? And I think if young women were able to see that and witness that, like you said, and have that as part of their normal life, it would be less scary, it would be more sacred, you would have people around you, you'd feel more held, and you'd have the village. So I wonder, like, what would you, what suggestions do you have moving forward with this? Because I absolutely know, like, you know, for me personally, I kept thinking, like, why am I 37 and I haven't had kids yet? And of course, part of that is that, like, I've been through my massive spiritual awakening, and I'm so grateful. Like, I feel far more ready to bring a child into the world now, knowing how I want to raise them, than I did 5 years ago. Absolutely, I was a totally different person. So I am really grateful for that. And I know that I do still have time, even though, like, the pressure of external reality is like, oh, you've got a biological clock, and that's another whole load of, you know, crock of shit. But at the same time, I have this resistance because I don't have that village, and in my womb, I feel very strongly, because I'm so in tune with my intuition, that that is what I need before I bring a child into this world. And I don't really fully know, like you said, where to summon that village. You know, like, I hold space for women all the time, and it's beautiful, but because I'm holding this space, I'm not necessarily expecting those women to be there for me in the same way. Like I said, my actual friendship group, where I am now, where I live, is very it's not, no one is really in the same position as me, so I don't feel like I have that full sisterhood of, like, you're going through the same process as me at the same time, we can go through this together.
I think it is hard. I think that there's, I mean, in my opinion, there's no way back. We can't I mean, not in the same way that it used to be. We're not going back to the romanticized sort of view of the village with the wise woman, and we're all picking vegetables from the vegetable garden and all of those things. Lovely, but it's not necessarily the way that our society is set up anymore. So I think we have to move through. And I've heard a really lovely saying, which is revillaging, which is as simple as setting up, you know, we create birth plans, but we don't create the postpartum plan so much, which is something I like to do with my clients, is just to set out sort of non-negotiables and have that support network in place and outline your expectations in advance. So have you got someone that can provide you with, really, like you say, a food train, a meal train, or set up someone to drop you food for the first 40 days, 42 days of postpartum? Have you got someone that can pick up your washing and taking it away and bring it back, so when it's all beautifully washed and smells lovely, so you've not got to do it? Someone that can pop the hoover around or do those things, hold the baby so you can shower and rest. But also, as you move through to later in the postpartum, can you offer the woman at the park your snacks, you know, for her little one, or offer to grab something from the top shelf because there's a mum who's got her hands full? And I think it's just, I know that sounds really simple and that's simplifying the whole thing, but that's achievable. That's not far-fetched. That's not something that no one can do. You can find someone, I would hope, whether that's a friend, a neighbor, or someone that you can call on to help you with those things. But also, as you move through your pregnancy, if you've got a friend that's pregnant, for example, look at arranging for a mother's blessing, or look at arranging for a lactation consultant appointment, or a doula, or something that actually she, you know, baby wearing consultancy, something like that, where she's investing in herself for her future. Because those first, I think it's in Chinese culture, they do the 42 days Chinese confinement. And
I think
they believe,
a number of cultures, that when you said 40 days or 42 days, that really resonated with me in my womb. And I was like the
heard that
40 days, it's like
it's like
something
the
about
fourth trimester.
It's like, oh, they wandered the desert for 40 years, like 40 days. It's always like a kind of a 40 seems to be quite a magic number, and I'm curious to know what
good question,
like symbolism or the mysticism behind that might be. But when you said that, I felt that as like, yeah, that feels right. Like that's like 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and it feels right. You said 6 weeks, you go to the doctor, the magic 6 weeks. That maybe there's something around the day.
Well, they say, I think it is in the Chinese culture, they say that, and there's other cultures that say the same thing, like you say, but after the first 40, how the woman is treated in the first 40 days postpartum will then impact the next 40 days, etc., etc. And that's where it spreads. And I just think, if we can't value, before we can value the mother, we need to value the woman, right? We need to understand and to, I mean, like a lot of things that women do, we're not treating them as whole beings. And there's a beautiful description, which is matrescence. I don't know if you've heard that word before, which is sort of like adolescence. It's the unraveling, the transition, the growth as a woman moves from maiden to mother. And that's not just the first time she has a baby, that's every time she births, because there's a rebirth of woman and it's a new identity. And if we can't honor that and hold that sacred rite of passage and surround that woman with the love and the power that she needs, it affects her whole, not just, I mean, postpartum is forever. Once you've birthed, you are postpartum, right? It doesn't just last for those 40 days. But if you can't hold them in that space, where do we go? So I think the revillaging is somewhere to start, is these little tiny things that you can just slot in, that it's just not hard.
Yeah, and it really resonates with me, because obviously, you know, I'm a rebirthing breath worker as well. Like I look a lot at the birth script and, you know, how people come into this world, and that affects their patterns of behavior and the way they navigate the world. And
that's how I found you, was on another podcast when you were talking about that. So that sings to me.
Beck's another amazing doula on her podcast, because it's so, and I've explored loads about my birth script and had lots of conversations with my mum about her journey into motherhood. And she lost a baby before me, and she hemorrhaged, and she had an abruption. She was in hospital for like 3 weeks, and they didn't think she was going to survive. The baby died. I was next in the womb. Like there's a whole story there, and it's very obvious to me why I've had to work so hard to trust the world around me, because of the way I onto this planet. And, you know, as much as my mum might argue against it, like she must have held anxiety, and she wanted to birth me naturally, and the doctors told her she was crazy to do that. Like they were literally like, do you want the baby to die? like, you know, as in me. So I think that, you know, there was already stories there, and the more I work with people's birth scripts, the more I see how it affects their patterns of behavior. So if the mother is stressed and the mother is not being taken care of, it's going to affect the baby, and the baby will carry that through, and it will just be a generational trauma, and we just keep on.
I always say birth work is earth work, right? Like,
yeah,
the way that babies are brought into this world will impact how they interact with the earth, and it goes on and on, cycle after cycle.
And I've seen it with like friends of mine that have kids that have told me the different birth stories. Like the kids were born in the water birth, like in the water bath at home, like with the music, all of that. They tend to really trust the world, and they tend to be really chill, and they don't tend to have the same attachment to the mother, like the neediness. Whereas the babies that come in through cesarean, like me, like your son, or induced, they tend to have like, they're really impatient, they don't tend to trust the world, they're much more clingy towards the mother. There are like so many, you know, and it's very clear, like when you, and I can see it in the difference in my friends' kids, and when they tell me the stories, it's like, it's so obvious to me. And you know, even when I first met my partner, I was like, I knew he hadn't been breastfed for, in like the 5 minutes that I met him, I was like, you have not been breastfed, I know it. And I just knew it from like his mannerisms, from the way he ate food, like his attachment to food.
Really?
Yeah,
that's so interesting.
Yeah, and instantly, like, I knew. And then when I asked his mom, and yeah, I was right. Like, and it's just so clear, like, you know, he's had a lot of issues with like gut issues in his life, and it's like that there's a lot of, yeah, it's just so connected. And I can just see it instantly in the patterns of behavior, and if we're not nurturing the mother, like you said, then it's affecting the baby, and then that's affecting generations. My final question to you, which I ask all my podcast guests, is what is a liberated woman to you?
I would say that to be liberated is to be free, to do, say, be whoever, whatever the fuck you want, and make those decisions and trust your gut and your intuition, and to be able to do that. And if something goes awry, you've made that decision, and you can own that, and know that that's not for you to hold. That is just the way it's gone, and next time we go again.
Amazing.
Is, I think, what I would say.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You can find all of Evlyn's details in the show notes. I've put her Instagram and her website, so if you want to contact her or you have any questions, you're free to reach out to her. Thank you so much.
Any mummies in Norfolk, I'm about. Let's build a tribe.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Shani.